We're starting to get some basic functionality in our app, but we need to actually populate our picker view with some real data. So let's go ahead and start to do that. As we do that, it's important to think about what kind of data should be there. What should be the range of values in our picker view? Should it be from 0 to 50? Should we have negative values? Should we go from, what range should it be? These are important things to think about when you're designing an app. So for right now, we're going to make a property up at the top to make an array of values, because array seems to be a good way to store this information. So private var temperature, temperature values, and it equals an array of integers, and it's going to create a new array. So that's just going to create an empty array of values, and it's private so that only this class can use it. So in our viewDidLoad method, let's go ahead and add some values so that when our view opens up, it populates our array. So temperature values equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll put in 5 temperatures in our array. So then in our title for row, instead of showing just n, we're going to let Celsius value equal temperature values, and I'm going to select the row. So remember that row is an integer that's passed to this method. So the temperature value, so in the first row, it'll be 0. So temperature values, it'll pick the first element, and let Celsius value be the first element in the temperatures value row. For row 1, it'll be the next value, and 2, and so on. So it's just, again, picker view is implementing this, and for each row, it's putting in the corresponding Celsius value, or from the temperature values array. And then I'm going to return Celsius value. And then my degree symbol, I took that out, I probably shouldn't have done that. C. So for each row, it's going to pick the corresponding value in the temperature values array, let that equal to Celsius value, and then return that. So remember, picker view is calling this. It's using this method to populate each one of its rows individually. So now let's go ahead and run that. See what we get. So I've got 1 degree. Whoa. And as soon as I run it, it says array index out of range. And the reason for that is I put that I had 10 rows, but there's only 5 values in my array. So for the extra 5 rows, it's looking in this array, but there's no values, so it crashes. The index is out of range. So there's probably a better way to do this. So instead of returning a hard value of 10, I'm going to return, under my number of rows, I'm going to return temperature values dot count. So it's always going, the number of rows will always be the number of elements in this array. If it was 100 values, it would return 100 rows. This is a much more accepted way of returning a number of rows than actually putting in a specific value. So let's go ahead and run that. See if that solves that problem. And notice now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is good. And if I wanted to have a temperature converter that only did 5 values, we would be done with that part. But I think I want my app to be a little more flexible. So we probably want to add more numbers. But if I wanted, let's say I want my temperatures to go from negative 100 to positive 100. That's a lot of values. I don't want to have to type all that in to an array. So probably a loop might be a better way to do that. So let's go ahead and write a loop in my viewDidLoad method. So I'm going to let a lower bound for lower boundary equal negative 100 and let upper boundary or upper bound equal positive 100. So now let me delete this. Let's go ahead and write a old style loop. So for index equals lower bound, this means, so this will be our starting point. And as long as the index is less than or equal to upper bound, so start with the lower number and keep going as long as that number is less than or equal to the upper number. And then each time add 1. Okay, so plus plus means add 1 to that index. And then temperature values dot append index. So this is what we call an old C style loop, and C, the old C programming language, where you initialize a variable, you say how long you want it to run, and then you add 1 to it each time, and then we're just appending that value each time to our array. So now let's go ahead and run that to see if that works. Now you see I've got negative 100, and it goes all the way to positive 100. So now we very quickly populated our picker view with numbers from negative 100 to 100. But this is not the most elegant way to do things. It's like that's it's many lines. So there's actually a faster way to do that, and we saw that in our Space Adventure project. We'll use the for in loop. So let's go ahead and write for index. And again, index is just a variable I picked. It could be anything. For index in negative 100 and then 3 dots to 100. So in Python we use the for something in range. Well, instead of using in range, you use the 3 dots as your separator. And then I'll do temperature values dot append index. So instead of having to write an upper bound and a lower bound, I can do a for in, and that accomplishes the exact same thing. But as we also learned in Space Adventure, there's an even more elegant way to do this, and that is with using the map function. Before we implement map, let's just make sure this works as we expect it to. So let's run our unit converter, and we can see that the values seem to be there. We won't go through the whole thing this time. So let's go ahead and implement map. So I'm going to get rid of this for index in. And let's go ahead and write up here. We're going to implement map. So this part will still be the same, but it's going to be negative 100 dot 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 to 100. That's the range. And then I'm going to do dot map to map that information. And oops, I'm going to use some special notation, $0 and then close the brace. And all this does, this $0 is simply a placeholder for whatever value is currently being looked at. So remember that when you do a map, the end result of map is an array. So this statement is going to produce an array called temperature values featuring numbers from negative 100 to 100. So it basically iterates or loops over these values, and each value is given this temporary placeholder of this, and then it's appended to the array. So in one statement, we've created an array of values. Again, just to make sure that works, let's go ahead and do that. And you can see that we get the same result, positive and negative numbers. Okay, so now we have populated our picker view, which is great, but we have not yet done any sort of temperature conversion, which is one of the major points of this project. So let's get working on that next time.